Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 294. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Going to pick up where I left off in the last podcast, where I'm going to get back into covering what's going on with the Ukraine war. In the last podcast, we started getting into Syria and the chaos that has erupted in Syria, religious minorities, the Alawites, being persecuted, killed, massacred, along with Syrian Christians. And it relates back to Ukraine because I was explaining in the last podcast how the relationship between the United States and Russia began to break down in 2013 in Obama's second term. After in Obama's first term, he had a pretty chummy relationship with Vladimir Putin in Russia. He did the Russian reset. He in the debate with Mitt Romney, was telling Mitt Romney that the 1980s called. They want their foreign policy back because Mitt Romney was saying Russia was a big threat. And Obama didn't have an adversarial relationship in his first term, but the relationship started to become adversarial in Obama's second term in 2013. And it all was surrounded by the adversarial relationship between the two countries was surrounded by what was going on. It was being the adversity between the two countries was being fueled, let's say that, by what was going on in Syria. And I was explaining in the last podcast how Obama chose to support, and he chose the side of the Sunni rebels, which were terrorists. Obviously, we see now that they were terrorists by what they're doing to the Christians and the Alawite minority there. And Putin chose the side of Assad. And Putin, like Donald Trump in the last podcast that I played, he was making the case that, yeah, Assad's not great, but the people that Obama's supporting, they're even worse. And Putin was right. Putin was right about Syria. Trump was right about Syria. The people that have the Sunni extremists, the rebels that Obama supported, are no better than Assad. They're actually worse. And who is there in Syria opening up their military bases, taking in the Alawites and the Christians and giving them shelter and comfort from these terrorist extremists that Obama was supporting? It's Russia. So what we were talking about in the last podcast, it does relate to what's going on in Ukraine, because that is when the friction between the two countries started. I want to start this podcast with this clip. This clip started going viral a couple of weeks ago. This is Bill Clinton in an interview with Piers Morgan, and they're talking about Russia in Syria and him negotiating with Russia to help secure the chemical weapons from Assad. And he said that he worked with Russia to secure those chemical weapons from Assad, and Russia kept their end of the bargain. Russia did what they said they were going to do. I want you to listen to what Bill Clinton says here to Piers Morgan.
Look, Mr. Putin he's very smart.
Well, you know him better than most people.
Yeah, I do.
What was he like behind closed doors, away from, the sort of the public utterances?
Smart and remarkably, we had a really good, blunt relationship.
How blunt?
Brutally blunt.
Ever fisticuffs?
No, but I think the right strategy most of the time is, but it's frustrating to people in your line of work. You should be brutally honest with people in private. And then if you want them to help you, try to avoid embarrassing them in public.
Right.
Now, sometimes they do things which make it impossible.
Understand what Clinton's saying here, because the media is constantly pressuring Trump to say bad things about Vladimir Putin in public. The media is, why won't you say anything bad about Vladimir Putin? Why won't you criticize Vladimir Putin? And Trump says, I'm not going to do that because I'm trying to negotiate with him. Back to the UN resolution where Trump administration voted against the UN resolution criticizing Putin and Russia and throwing logs on the fire. Trump says, I'm not going to do that. And that's the exact same thing that Bill Clinton is saying here, is that I'm not going to embarrass him in public when we're trying to negotiate with him, be brutally honest in private, but in public, I'm not going to embarrass him.
We had a really good, blunt relationship.
How blunt?
Brutally blunt.
Ever fisticuffs?
No, but I think the right strategy most of the time is, but it's frustrating to people in your line of work.
In the media.
You should be brutally honest with people in private. And then if you want them to help you, try to avoid embarrassing them in public.
Right.
Now, sometimes they do things which make it impossible for you to keep quiet. But by and large, I found all the people I dealt with appreciated it if I told them the truth. How I honestly felt and what our interests were and what our objectives were. And they also appreciated it when I didn't kick them around in public for as long as I couldn't kick them around. So, that's my experience. And
did Putin ever renege on a personal agreement he made to you?
He did.
No.
Closed doors,
So that is a very important question. Did Putin ever renege? Did Putin ever go back on his word when you were negotiating with him, Bill Clinton? Is what Piers Morgan says. Did Putin ever break the trust that you had in him to negotiate with him? Was Putin fair in your negotiations?
A personal agreement he made to you?
He did not.
So behind closed doors, he could be trusted?
He kept his word in all the deals we made.
He kept his word in all the deals he made with me, Vladimir Putin, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton says, I trusted Vladimir Putin. He kept his word with me. I had to speak harsh to him in private, never embarrassed him in public, but he kept his word with me. He can be trusted. Bill Clinton. This is George Bush. George Bush with Vladimir Putin. Listen to what he says.
I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy.
I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy, is what George W. Bush is saying about Vladimir Putin. So Bill Clinton trusted him, and we know Obama trusted him. Obama promised him more flexibility after his reelection. George Bush saying here that I trust him. I looked in his eyes. I found him to be very trustworthy, is what George Bush says.
I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul.
A lot of
people never really dreamt that an American president and a Russian president could have established the friendship that we had. We were enemies for a long period of time.
Yeah, we got a friendship going on here between George Bush and Vladimir Putin. And he looked into his soul and he can trust him. So Bill Clinton trusts him. Barack Obama trusts him. Bill Clinton says that he never went back on his word. And then George W. Bush looked into his soul. So he's very trustworthy. I found this clip. And I want to play it because in the Oval Office, when Trump and Zelenskyy were going back and forth and they had that big blow up in the Oval Office, Vladimir Zelenskyy, when he was addressing J.D. Vance, says that we can't have a ceasefire. We can't have a agreement with Putin and diplomacy. What kind of diplomacy are you talking about, JD, is what he says. That Putin has violated ceasefires with us before. He wouldn't exchange prisoners after agreeing to exchange prisoners. And I'm not sure what Zelenskyy was referring to there when he says that, but I found this from January 2004, where Zelenskyy actually praised a prisoner exchange that he did with Russia. And this is after the war had already started, again, 2024. But take a listen to this clip.
More than 200 prisoners of war have now been exchanged between Russia and Ukraine. Kyiv says this is the largest prison exchange between the two countries since the war began almost 2 years ago. The Prisoners include Ukrainian soldiers and civilians, according to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. In return for those held captive, Russia says it received 248 servicemen from Ukrainian-controlled territory. Russia credited the United Arab Emirates for helping to make this happen.
So the United Arab Emirates is again acting as the mediator between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and the United States, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And that's where we just had the recent Saudi summit where first the Trump administration hosted Russia there, and then they just hosted Zelenskyy in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. And we got a lot of big news out of that meeting in Saudi Arabia with Marco Rubio and representatives from Ukraine. And now Ukraine has agreed to a ceasefire. But before we talk about this agreement that Ukraine made on Tuesday to a 30-day ceasefire, I want to take us back in time. I want to go back 2 weeks, and when Zelenskyy was here in the United States meeting with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, after meeting with senators and members of Congress who fueled him up to go in hot in the Oval Office with Trump. He was very confrontational. He had also met with European leaders a week before that when they all met in Kiev for the anniversary of the invasion. And they all put batteries in his back, fueled him up. He went into the Oval Office hot. And I want you to remember what Zelenskyy was saying about a ceasefire 2 weeks ago.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long.
Look at his attitude.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you'd take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire.
So only with guarantees. He says no ceasefire. I will do a ceasefire, but only with guarantees. Now, his 2 weeks ago, Zelensky's commitment to a ceasefire came with conditions. That we will only agree to a ceasefire with conditions, and the conditions were with guarantees. That we don't want a ceasefire.
Damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you'd take it. So the
he should have taken it. He should have taken it 2 weeks ago, and you're going to see why he should have taken it 2 weeks ago. But he came in hot because he was fueled up by the senators that he met with. He was fueled up by the European leaders that he had met with, and he came in confrontational. And we'll never take it. He said never. He said we'll never do a ceasefire with guarantees. The conditions for a ceasefire are with guarantees. That's what this guy was saying 2 weeks ago.
Soldiers, it would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you'd take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
Ask our people. Ask our people if they want a ceasefire. It's not only me. Let's go back to Ukraine. Let's ask the people if they want a ceasefire. Nobody wants a ceasefire. It's what this guy was saying 2 weeks ago. Only with guarantees. We'll do a ceasefire with guarantees.
Ceasefire. I want to go, and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you'd take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
We don't want a ceasefire.
Doesn't matter for you what
that wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the
So he's being confrontational. He's saying, no, we don't want a ceasefire. Ask our people in Ukraine. But my people don't want a ceasefire. We'll do a ceasefire if we get guarantees. Our ceasefire, the ceasefire comes with conditions, is what this guy was saying 2 weeks ago. And that's what President Trump understood coming out of that meeting. This is the press conference that he did right after Zelenskyy left the White House. Listen to what he says.
They should have an immediate ceasefire. That was the other thing he didn't want to do about ceasefire. A ceasefire could take place immediately. A contract, if you want to end the war, you sign up an agreement. That's going to take a period of time. It takes time. I want it to end immediately. And I think if you had a ceasefire, it would be a ceasefire, a real one, that would end it. But
so 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump was putting the ceasefire on the table. Zelenskyy did not want a ceasefire. He was saying that the only way we'll accept a ceasefire is if we have guarantees with the ceasefire. And Donald Trump, you remember, his team had already met with the Russians in Saudi Arabia the week before Zelenskyy comes over. So they had already talked to the Russians, and something led them to believe, after talking to the Russians, that they could get an immediate ceasefire from the Russians 2 weeks ago. But Zelenskyy said no ceasefire 2 weeks ago. Zelenskyy said that we'll only accept a ceasefire with guarantees 2 weeks ago. Very confrontational. And this is what President Trump got out of that meeting. And then Zelenskyy goes over to Europe after he leaves the confrontational meeting in the White House with Donald Trump. He goes over to Europe. He meets with Ursula. He meets with Macron. He meets with Starmer. And then he says this, the date on this article is March 3rd. So the Oval Office meeting was on February 28th. So this is 3 days later, after he goes over to Europe and he's grandstanding with all the European leaders. And then Zelenskyy says this: Ukraine's Zelenskyy says the end of the war with Russia is very, very far away. Very, very far away is what he says after meeting with the Europeans. So Trump's trying to get him to agree to this ceasefire. No, we won't agree to the ceasefire. Only with, the conditions of guarantees, security guarantees. Goes over to Europe and meets with Starmer. Starmer writes him what did they write him? A $2 billion check or something like that. And they're all patting him on the back, putting more fuel in his tank. And he says that the war is very, very far away from being over. The end of the war is very, very far away. So this set Trump off, because he said that not only do I not want a peace deal, the end of this war is very, very far away. And what does Trump say here in this press conference? I want it over. I want it over now. I don't want it to be very, very far away. I want it to be over now. And then this is just a rebuke of Donald Trump to make this public statement when Donald Trump is saying, I want this over now. I want a ceasefire now. And then he says that the end of this war is very, very far away. So that's the reason that Trump paused military aid and cut off intelligence support to him. Not because what happened in the Oval Office, because this dude's, making a fool out of Trump, saying that the war is very, very far away and I don't want a peace agreement. That's what set Trump off. Take a listen.
Well, while the Prime Minister was on his feet, President Trump posted this on social media, along with an article that said Ukraine's President Zelenskyy says the end of war with Russia is very, very far away. This is what Donald Trump wrote. This is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelenskyy, and America will not put up with it for much longer. It is what I was saying. This guy doesn't want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing, and Europe, in the meeting they had with Zelenskyy, stated flatly that they cannot do the job without the US. Probably not a great statement to have been made in terms of a show of strength against Russia.
Yeah, probably not a great statement to be made. That's what set Trump off, and what pissed him off is that this guy is saying that the end of the war is very, very far away. And Trump said, oh, it's very, very far away. Then you're going to do it without American weapons and American intelligence briefs. This is why, because Zelensky saying that the war was very, very far away, and then he wouldn't agree to a ceasefire 2 weeks ago. That's what set Trump off. That's why he paused military aid and intelligence. So over the last 2 weeks, since the Oval Office meeting and Zelensky refusing to accept a ceasefire 2 weeks ago, over those last 2 weeks, Russia has been making huge advancements in the Kursk region, but also in other regions in the eastern part of Ukraine. Over the last 2 weeks, and a lot of this is because the Trump administration has paused. They did pause weapons and intelligence briefs to Ukraine, but pausing those weapons and not giving Ukraine intelligence contributed to it. But I mean, these advances that the Russians were making, they probably would have been able to do this even if Trump wouldn't have paused weapons and intelligence briefs, but that sure didn't help. But over the last 2 weeks, since Zelensky says no ceasefire until we get security guarantees, and saying that the war is very, very far from being over, in the last 2 weeks, since having that posture with the United States, the Russians have been making huge advancements, particularly in the Kursk region. I want you to listen to this clip.
In Russia's Ukraine war, the Russian army claims to have made major new gains in the western Kursk region. The defense ministry in Moscow says it's retaken a dozen settlements and more than 100 square kilometers of territory in the Kursk region. The villages are to the north, east, and south of Zudza, the main town in the region under Ukrainian control.
So the Russians have taken Zudza. What you need to understand about Kursk is that it is in Russia. This is a Russian territory that Ukrainians took over about 6 months ago. And this was a huge bargaining chip for Ukraine, because Russia has seized 5 provinces, if you include Crimea, in the east of Ukraine. So when Ukraine and Russia get to the negotiating table, and you can see that that's coming to a head, particularly the way Donald Trump is pressing it, that they're going to come to the negotiating table. And what Ukraine wanted to do is they wanted to use this region that is in Russia that they took over, this Kursk region. They wanted to use that as a bargaining chip to get back some of this land that Russia has annexed. That, we'll give you back Kursk region, but we're going to want some of this land back that you've seized from us. Now that Russia is on the verge, they haven't fully taken this entire region back, but they've taken most of it back, over 80%. And now that Russia has taken this back, well, they haven't fully taken it back. That's the big problem, is they're on the march, and they are almost complete in taking this territory back. They've taken over 80%. So this is a huge deal, because over the last 2 weeks, since Zelensky said no to a ceasefire, and all the advancements that Russia has made in this region have happened over the last 2 weeks. They made some huge strategic move in sending Russian troops through a gas pipeline that they had laid underground to ship gas into Ukraine, that Zelensky shut off the gas pipeline. So these Russian soldiers, they used gas masks, and they walked through the gas pipeline to spring up behind the Ukrainian forces. And they ended up trapping them and taking a lot of them prisoner. And that's how they regained this area. And this has all happened over the last 2 weeks. That none of this, if Ukraine would have agreed to a ceasefire 2 weeks ago, when Zelensky was in the Oval Office acting like an idiot, or 3 days later saying that the war was very, very far away, And if they would have agreed back then, it's likely that none of these advancements in the Kursk region would have happened because, who knows? It's hard to say, but it's not debatable at all that these advancements that Russia has been making have happened in the last 2 weeks. And this is a clip about that gas pipeline mission that I just told you about. Take a listen.
Russian forces advanced further in their efforts to retake the Kursk region on Monday, threatening to encircle thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, just as Kyiv prepared for talks with top U.S. diplomats.
Threatening to encircle thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. They encircled 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers because they sprung up behind them, and these Ukrainian soldiers are trapped. They're trapped between the soldiers behind them and the soldiers in front of them. They're trapped because of this gas pipeline maneuver.
Just as Kyiv prepared for talks with top US diplomats in Saudi Arabia. This video, released on Saturday by Ukraine's air assault forces, is said to show Ukrainian artillery fire targeting Russian special forces, who crept for miles through a gas pipeline to surprise Ukrainian troops holding Russian territory near Sudzha. Reuters was able to verify the location and that a gas pipeline runs underground there. This video, said to show Russian troops inside the tunnel, was posted on social media. In it, the soldiers reference March 8th and that they're heading towards Sudzha, though the date and location were not fully verifiable. Russian forces captured 3 more settlements in the area on Sunday after using the pipeline. By encircling Ukrainian soldiers, they aim to force them either to flee or to surrender in western Russia.
So all of this has happened in the last 2 weeks, all of these advancements into the Kursk region to take this territory back. I want you to look at this. This was a post from David Axelrod. David Axelrod was I think he was the chairman of the Barack Obama campaign in 2008, but he's part of the Obama administration, David Axelrod. And David Axelrod tweeted this out yesterday. Trump's already influenced future negotiations in Putin's favor by freezing military aid and intel to Ukraine for critical days, during which Russia pressed its campaign to recover the Kursk territory taken last year by Ukraine. This may deprive Ukraine of a key bargaining chip. Absolutely right, David Axelrod. This does deprive them of this bargaining chip. They don't have anything to come to the table with when they try to make a land deal when they finally get to negotiations, because yes, they've lost this bargaining chip. And again, I don't know that if Trump hadn't paused military aid and intel, that would have made a difference. Maybe our intelligence would have told Ukraine that, hey, they're using the gas pipeline to come up and spring up behind you. Maybe we had intelligence of that and didn't share it with them. Who knows? But the saying that Trump has influenced the future negotiations in Putin's favor by freezing military aid and intel. No, this is on Zelenskyy. If Zelenskyy wouldn't have come into the White House acting like a fool and being confrontational, if he would have at least discussed the ceasefire at that time, then what happened in Kursk may not have happened, because all that stuff that happened in Kursk happened over the last 2 weeks, while Zelensky's being confrontational with Trump, saying that the war is is very, very far away from being over, grandstanding with Starmer and the other European leaders. So while Zelenskyy was doing all that, yeah, the Russians were taking Kursk back. You can't blame Trump because Zelenskyy is the one that made a fool of himself, and he's already apologized for it. So if you're saying that no, he didn't do what I'm saying he did, then why did he apologize? So now brings us to the Saudi summit. The Ukrainians in Saudi Arabia meeting with Marco Rubio and Trump's envoy, and that was on Tuesday. And this is what came out of that meeting. Take a listen.
The U.S. has resumed military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine after Kyiv said it is ready to accept a 30-day ceasefire with Russia.
Oh, now so they're ready to accept the ceasefire now. Are there any conditions associated with the ceasefire, like Zelenskyy was saying in the Oval Office 2 weeks ago? Are there conditions that are associated with this 30-day ceasefire, or are they just accepting the ceasefire, as it is now? Because they had a chance to accept it 2 weeks ago and they didn't. So now they're accepting the ceasefire after this meeting in Saudi Arabia. Trump has committed to restart the weapons deliveries and the intelligence. But you're 2 weeks too late. Russia's already made all these advancements in the Kursk region, and also in Donbass. They are pushing forward there because they don't occupy all the territory in Donbass. So they've been pushing forward there. A lot has happened over the last 2 weeks is what I'm trying to get at. But now they've agreed to it because they've been getting their butts kicked for the last 2 weeks. So now they come to Saudi Arabia and they all of a sudden agree to a 30-day ceasefire so they can rearm.
The U.S. has resumed military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine after Kyiv said it is ready to accept a 30-day ceasefire with Russia. Now, this comes after the high-level face-to-face talks in Saudi Arabia that we reported yesterday. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the deal will now be presented to Russia. But it remains unclear if Moscow will agree to the terms. Holly Williams brings us more from Kyiv.
It is a confusing time for American diplomacy. After yesterday's meeting in Saudi Arabia, the US now appears to be back in Ukraine's corner and calling on Russia to agree to a 30-day ceasefire. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, made it clear that the ball is now in Russia's court.
That was the line that everybody was using. The ball's in your court, Putin. Ball's in your court now. So now that Ukraine has agreed to the 30-day ceasefire, now they're expecting Russia to just accept this 30-day ceasefire when they're advancing on every front, where they're making huge advancements in Kursk, like I said, in Donbass. And it doesn't benefit Russia to accept the ceasefire now. So everything in the ceasefire at this point, 2 weeks ago, it was different. 2 weeks ago, it was completely different. And this is just another example of Ukraine making terrible decisions. And as they make terrible decisions, they lose more land. If they would have negotiated peace after 2014, after Russia had annexed Crimea, then they wouldn't have lost Donbass and the Donbass region and the Kherson region and the Zaporizhia region, those provinces. They wouldn't have lost all that land in the eastern part of Ukraine. Zaporozhia is what it's called. They wouldn't have lost all that land in the eastern part of Ukraine if they would have negotiated in 2014, and they did negotiate. They just didn't keep up with the negotiations. Russia, you're going to see if we get there, but Russia doesn't annex Donbass into 2022. Russia was negotiating in Minsk to allow those regions to remain independent. And because of Ukrainians' behavior, then they end up losing that territory. And because of their behavior over the last 2 weeks, now they've lost the Kursk region and they're losing more territory in Donbass because of their behavior. So now they just want to accept the ceasefire because they've been getting killed and they've been losing badly for the last 2 weeks. Now they just want to accept the ceasefire without any conditions, and they want Russia to take it. And it's not beneficial for Russia. That if Russia stops now, there's some major issues for Russia agreeing to this ceasefire for 30 days. And we're going to get into those issues, but I want you to listen to what this reporter says about how everything in the ceasefire, if Russia agrees to it, is an advantage to Ukraine.
This is excellent for Ukraine. So Ukraine has done a few things through this meeting today in Saudi Arabia. The first one is that it has gotten back some of the most important things it has lost over the last week, notably intelligence sharing and the arms support from the United States. The intelligence sharing is a crucial minute-by-minute thing that Ukraine needs in order to have the strongest possible position it can. It also has put the ball in Russia's court. So something that Ukrainians have been trying to get the Americans to understand is how they do want peace and do want to have a solid, long-lasting peace. But there has been a perception that the Ukrainians have been the harder actor to work with.
Yeah, I wonder where that perception came from, that they're the harder actor to work with. Where'd that perception come from? There's been that perception that they're the harder actor to work with. Wonder where that came from.
Be on Russia to show whether Russia wants to be good friends with the United States, as Trump hopes perhaps for the future. Does Russia want to come to the table, and does Russia also want to abide by a 30-day ceasefire? If Russia says no, it becomes very clear that it is not Ukraine that is the difficult actor, but Russia. And if Russia stops, that's great for Ukraine. Ukraine also needs a break.
If Russia, so they've tried to, and I'm going to be honest with you, man. I wasn't sure about Marco Rubio as Secretary of State when Trump nominated him. As a matter of fact, I got a little sick to my stomach when I saw that Trump was nominating Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, because I know Marco Rubio's foreign policy. I know the hawk that Marco Rubio has been his entire career in the Senate. So I know that Marco Rubio's foreign policy is not the same as MAGA's foreign policy, as Trump's foreign policy. Now, he's said a lot of, the right things in the, past 2 months in the early part of this administration. But I mean, you can't just expect someone to make a complete reversal on their foreign policy like Marco Rubio has appeared to have done. But in Saudi Arabia, Marco Rubio was leading the discussions, and who knows, maybe, he suggested to Zelenskyy, why don't you take this deal, the ceasefire deal, we'll do a 30-day ceasefire. You guys are getting your butts kicked anyway right now. This is going to benefit you to take the ceasefire, even though you said 2 weeks ago that you would only take the ceasefire. And you guys remember what was going on in the Oval Office meeting when these two are going at it. Marco Rubio's sitting there. Did they show Marco? Marco Rubio's sitting right next to J.D. Vance, and he doesn't look comfortable when this interaction is going on in the Oval Office with Trump. So maybe Marco Rubio over in Saudi Arabia encouraged the Ukrainian negotiators to take this deal, and then saying, look, you guys are getting killed. You guys are losing badly. You need this to help you guys, your army regroup, to rearm. So you need a 30-day ceasefire. So without conditions, 2 weeks later, after they've been getting their butts kicked for 2 weeks, they accept the ceasefire. And like this reporter is saying, then that puts Russia in a bind, because they have one of two choices. They can either keep fighting and finish taking the Kursk region, or they can pause all fighting and allow the Ukrainian army to regroup, to rearm, to get the intelligence they need and just keep up the fight. I mean, what is Russia going to do in that situation? But so I believe personally that Marco Rubio came up with this brilliant idea to put Russia into this dilemma. And that's what she's talking about here. She says that if Russia stops the fighting right now, that's brilliant. That's great for Ukraine if Russia stops the fighting right now, because Russia's killing Ukraine right now. They're beating the brakes off of Ukraine right now. So it's good for Ukraine if Russia stops the fighting right now.
Be good friends with the United States, as Trump hopes perhaps for the future. Does Russia want to come to the table, and does Russia also want to abide by a 30-day ceasefire? If Russia says no, it becomes very clear that it is not Ukraine that is the difficult actor, but Russia. And if Russia stops, that's great for Ukraine. Ukraine also needs a break. Ukraine also needs a good peace. And if Russia shows that it is not willing to abide by the terms of this agreement that the United States and Ukraine came to
there are no
in Saudi
terms.
Arabia, that they are going to be a problematic actor, and the United States and Europe and Ukraine are also going to have to think about what next with Russia. But
yeah, there are no terms. She says that if Russia won't abide by the terms, there are no terms. The terms are just stop fighting for 30 days. And not only stop fighting for 30 days, the United States has agreed to restart the arms to Ukraine. So basically what you're telling Russia is that a 30-day ceasefire while we arm Ukraine more. What did you think? Russia's stupid? Like they're going to agree to that? That we're going to stop fighting when we got them on the run? We're going to stop fighting for 30 days so the United States can rearm them? That would be crazy. No way Russia's going to agree to that. But Russia hadn't said no. I want you to listen to this clip.
Russian flags flying once again over the border town of Sudzha, according to state media. 6 months ago, Ukrainian troops seized this part of Russia in the western Kursk region. But now Russian special forces and others have fought and claimed it back. All of which has put a spring in Vladimir Putin's step, today meeting his Belarusian ally and giving his response to American demands for an immediate ceasefire.
We agree with the proposal that the fighting must end, but it has to be an agreement that leads to a long-term peace, that removes the root causes of the crisis.
Root causes.
Yes, but no. He supports the idea, but qualifies it with numerous questions about...
So now Putin has conditions for the ceasefire. That's interesting because 2 weeks ago, when Trump was trying to get Zelenskyy to agree to the ceasefire, Zelenskyy says he'd only agree with conditions. He'd only agree with guarantees. That's what he said. That's the same thing Putin's saying now. Putin's saying, yeah, I agree with the ceasefire, but only with conditions. Yeah, I'm not going to just stop fighting. And when we're advancing in all these areas, taking territory, taking prisoners, you know, why would I just stop fighting right now? So you can, so the Americans can send Ukraine more arms. That's foolish. So yeah, Putin says, yeah, I will agree to the ceasefire with conditions. We got some issues to talk about.
Causes of the crisis.
And the root causes, he says root causes. We need to talk about the root causes of this crisis.
But no, he supports the idea, but qualifies it with numerous questions about what it would mean for Kursk, the front line, rearmament, all of which he says demands painstaking study.
What about issues of control and verification? How can it and will it be guaranteed that nothing like this will happen? How will controls be organised?
The problem is that this does not sound like the immediate interim ceasefire agreed by US and Ukrainian negotiators in Saudi Arabia earlier this week. President Zelenskyy said Mr. Putin's response was predictable and manipulative, setting preconditions to delay a ceasefire as long as possible.
Now listen to Zelenskyy. Zelenskyy says, how dare Vladimir Putin try to set conditions for a ceasefire? Bro, that's what you did just 2 weeks ago. That's what you did just 2 weeks ago. You set conditions for the ceasefire. And now that Putin's done the same thing, you're trying to criticize him for doing what you did. You set conditions for the ceasefire. And now after 2 weeks of getting your butt kicked and you're losing, now you want to accept the ceasefire with no conditions. But Putin's been winning for the last 2 weeks and kicking your butt. So he's got conditions now.
President Zelenskyy said Mr. Putin's response was predictable and manipulative, setting preconditions to delay a ceasefire as long as possible.
He is actually preparing a refusal as of now. Putin, of course, is afraid to tell President Trump directly that he wants to continue this war, wants to kill Ukrainians.
Yeah, this is the guy that wants to continue the war, people. I'm sorry. I do not trust Zelenskyy, and I'm not a Putin apologist. I'm not a Russian. I'm just telling you the facts. I'm telling you the truth. That's what I am. I'm telling you the truth. And not in this podcast, maybe in the next one. I want to tell you, the hatred that the Ukrainians have for the Russians it's a huge problem. These Nazis that hate Russians, and not only the Russian army and the Russian Federation, even the Russian-speaking people within Ukraine, they hate them. They have major hatred for them that is not going to be solved with some peace agreement. And I have to go into that and explain that to you. Here's Putin when in that meeting that he had with the president of Belarus, where he's answering the Trump administration on this 30-day ceasefire. And this whole press conference wasn't about the ceasefire. This was just in response to one question that was asked Putin about if he's going to agree to this 30-day ceasefire. I want you to listen to a little bit of this part.
Americans really very, very pressuring them, taking into account how the situation looks like on the ground and how is the current situation on the ground. Maybe you have seen that yesterday I visited Kursk region, and I have listened to the reports of the head of the general staff, a commander of the military group, and his deputy about the situation in the border area, first of all, Kursk region, and in the area where Ukrainian troops are. What is the situation there now? It's completely under our control, and the groups that came to our territory are now isolated. It's complete isolation.
So I want to explain what he's saying. He's saying that in the Kursk region, when our military, when they traveled through that gas pipeline and then sprung up behind these Ukrainian soldiers that were there in Kursk, then we have them trapped. We have our soldiers behind them. We have our soldiers in front of them. And these soldiers are trapped. They're trapped, and they're in the Kursk region. And so he says that if we do a 30-day ceasefire now, so what are these soldiers that we have trapped? Are they just going to walk off and go back into Ukraine, or are they going to shoot their way out? Or are they going to put their arms down and we just let them leave? He says that we have major questions and concerns around a ceasefire at this point. 2 weeks ago, this wasn't the case. 2 weeks ago, when Trump was trying to get Zelenskyy to agree to a ceasefire, none of these advancements in Kursk had happened. The gas pipeline mission that the Russians did, none of that had happened 2 weeks ago when Trump's trying to get him to accept this deal. But now the situation has changed, is what Zelenskyy is saying. And we have these soldiers trapped there. I mean, what Putin is saying. We have these soldiers trapped there, Ukrainian soldiers. What? So what? We just stop fighting for 30 days so the Americans can rearm the Ukrainians and just let these soldiers that we have trapped, just let them go? Is that what you're talking about with the ceasefire? This is why Putin is saying, yeah, I'm interested in the ceasefire, but we got stuff to talk about. We got a lot of issues to talk about before we can agree to this ceasefire.
Complete control over fire. The management of Ukrainian troops inside of the zone of the incursion is lost. And if during the first period of time, like 1 week or 2 weeks ago, Ukrainian military personnel tried to get out there with small groups, right now it's impossible. They try to live in small groups, 2 to 3 people, because everything is completely under our fire control. The hardware is left there completely, I guarantee you. And if in the near time we have physical blockade, then no one would be able to leave. There will be only 2 ways, to be taken captives or die. And these conditions, in my opinion, for Ukrainians, it would be very well to get ceasefire at least for 30 days. But there are some little details.
So basically, he's saying that, yeah, it's a huge advantage for Ukraine to get a ceasefire right now. It's a huge advantage. I mean, and you don't have to be an Einstein to see what a huge advantage it is. 2 weeks ago was different. when we were trying to get the ceasefire from Zelensky. But now, under the circumstances now, it's a huge advantage for me to accept a ceasefire without any conditions. He's not saying no. He's just saying that we got a lot to talk about. We have I got conditions that Putin is saying that he will accept the ceasefire, but under conditions, the exact same thing that Zelensky was saying 2 weeks ago. But the situation has changed. Now, Zelensky is saying we accept the ceasefire with no conditions. Yeah, because you've been getting your butt kicked for the last 2 weeks. It's not an advantage for Putin to accept it now.
This is exactly what the Kremlin has been signaling all along. We just heard it coming out of Vladimir Putin's mouth, that they're only going to, what they really want here is not some, as they see it, gossamer ceasefire, fragile ceasefire that hasn't really covered all the details, that is not going to lead to a long-lasting, as Putin called it, a long-lasting peace that ultimately addresses the root causes. The root causes being what Russia sees as a threat to its own security by NATO encroachment.
Root causes go back to 2014 and the coup d'etat over Yanukovych. Root causes are going to go back to what happened in the Obama administration with the intervention into Ukrainian politics by Americans. The root causes are going to go back to Victoria Nuland's phone call and putting the Nazis in the government and the Nazis outlawing the Russian language and taking the war to the Russian speaking people in the East. The root causes are going to be all of that stuff. He's going to talk about all of that stuff when we negotiate a peace deal. Everything's going to come out.
A long-lasting peace that ultimately addresses the root causes. The root causes being what Russia sees as a threat to its own security by NATO encroachment, by Ukraine wanting to join NATO, by the Europeans holding up the prospect of security guarantees, something that once again Russia sees, paradoxically you might say, as a security threat to itself, that Ukraine poses a threat to Russia, and that more broadly the prospect of Ukraine within a European security architecture or even getting security guarantees poses a threat to Russia. So what this is it an outright rejection of a ceasefire? No, it isn't, because as we heard, they're the hedging words. He thanked Donald Trump for paying so much attention to the mechanics of the ceasefire, for giving it so much time when there are a whole bunch of other world issues that both of these leaders, all of them, have to face right now in a very tumultuous world. Yeah, so he paid he was thankful to Donald Trump. He said he likes the idea, of a ceasefire where cessation of hostilities stop. You could argue, who's going to argue against that, right? People want war to end. People want a cessation of hostilities. But the devil is in the details, and not really even in the details. It's what he went on to say. He talked about the 2,000-kilometer front line. It would be the largest front line in a ceasefire in a frozen conflict, that runs all the way through from eastern Ukraine down to the southern parts of Ukraine, delimiting those areas, the 4 regions that Russia invaded illegally.
So we're going to talk about the demilitarized zone that Putin is also requesting here in a moment. That's what he's making reference to. We'll see if we have time to get to that. But Putin has not said no to the ceasefire. He says that he wants direct talks with Donald Trump. He wants to negotiate the details of the ceasefire. He doesn't want the Americans to use the 30 days to rearm the Ukrainians the same way they did after Minsk II. If you remember, Angela Merkel admitting to the fact that we used the peace talks, the Minsk II negotiations, as a ploy to rearm the Ukrainians, to prepare them for war, that we never really meant to for there to be a peace deal. We just used that. This is Angela Merkel saying this, the former chancellor of Germany, that was the chancellor at the time of the Minsk II agreements. That was just a ploy, so we can use that time to arm Ukraine. You don't think Russia learned from that? So Russia's got some issues that they want to talk about before they agree to a ceasefire. But in reality, once you listen to this reporter, this is what Russia's really doing.
The Russians have made some rapid advances in the Kursk region in the last few days. There was this incredible and daring raid through a disused gas pipeline tunnel where Russian troops managed to come up behind Ukrainian troops and surprise them. Around 400 Ukrainian soldiers have been taken prisoner in just the last few days, and they obviously want to finish the job. So Putin's playbook will now be to play for time. He does not want to agree to a ceasefire before Russian troops have retaken the Kursk region. Elsewhere, Ukrainian troops are holding up well. The Russian advances in recent days has slowed, so those US supplies of arms, of course the Ukrainians will welcome those because those will enable them to hold the Russians further in other parts. But it does look like they've made a strategic withdrawal in the Kursk region, and they will probably give up Kursk fairly soon. So Putin is just going to play for time until they've retaken Kursk. I don't expect to see any fast agreement from the Russian side to the ceasefire. Putin will say, oh, we've got to discuss this first, we've got to discuss that. And he will push Trump. But as we do know, as you just mentioned, Trump is nothing if not unpredictable. So what Trump could do, what he may do, we don't know. And Putin has to bear that in mind as well.
So Putin is going to play for time. This guy's 100% right in what he says, that Putin's taken over 80% of the Kursk region. They've taken the major capital. I mean, they have taken this bargaining chip away from Zelenskyy. They don't have the Kursk region as a bargaining chip anymore. So, where's that clip? They don't have this as a bargaining chip anymore, but it's not fully taken over by the Russians yet. They have about maybe 15% more that they need, but the major parts of the Kursk area they have taken. Ukraine doesn't have this bargaining chip anymore. They've taken over 400 prisoners from the Ukrainian army. They have prisoners from the Ukrainian army trapped here. It's not advantageous for Putin to just stop now. So like this guy says, that Putin is just going to play for time now. Putin is going to stall it out and allow his forces to retake at least that area. And he's asking for direct talks with Donald Trump to work out the details of a ceasefire. But in reality, he's just stalling it for time so they can retake the entire Kursk area. And all of this is because of the way Zelenskyy acted 2 weeks ago, that he came in hot to the Oval Office, being confrontational. If he would have accepted a ceasefire, at least, agreed or even been more willing to talk about it and not be so confrontational 2 weeks ago, none of this would have happened. But in 2 weeks, things have changed significantly. And it's because of the way this guy behaved, saying that the war is very, very far away. That was he got some bad advice. The senators that you met with before you went to the Oval Office, the European leaders, they gave you some very bad advice. And now Trump has, this is a post that Trump put out this morning. He has spoken with Vladimir Putin. I guess he spoke with Vladimir Putin yesterday. And this post that Trump put out says, we had a very good and productive discussion with Vladimir Putin of Russia yesterday. And there is a very good chance that his horrible, bloody war can finally come to an end, in all caps. But at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. What is he talking about here? He's talking about the troops. And so he talked to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin said the same thing that he said in public in the press conference that he did with the president of Belarus. He says the same thing in this press conference. He says, look, my army has, thousands or hundreds of Ukrainian forces that are trapped in the Kursk region. We have forces in front of them, forces behind them. They can't get out. We have them trapped. And that's what he says in this press conference. That's what Vladimir Putin says. What, we're just going to stop fighting now and let these soldiers leave. So that's what Trump is making reference to in this Truth Social post that he put out today. That we had a very good talk with Vladimir Putin, that he wants the war to come to an end. But at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. I have strongly requested that Vladimir Putin, I have strongly requested to Vladimir Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre and not one seen since World War II. God bless them all. So Trump was on the phone with Putin. Putin told him what the situation is there in Kursk, and Trump is requesting that their lives be spared. Well, I mean, if we're able to negotiate a peace deal, maybe he can negotiate the release of these prisoners and or at least that their lives be spared. I mean, that all has to be worked out in the details of the negotiation. I have about 5 more minutes. I want to talk about this real quick. This came out of the Saudi summit after the meeting that Marco Rubio had with the representatives from Ukraine on Tuesday. And I want you to have a little bit of the audio from this. I want you to hear.
Rubio suggests Ukraine won't return to pre-2014 borders. By Alia Zehra. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters Monday that Ukraine was unlikely to win back all of the territory captured by Russia since 2014, as U.S. and Ukrainian officials are set to meet for talks in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday. Rubio said that Russia and Ukraine would both have to do difficult things to end the conflict. The most important thing that we have to leave here with is a strong sense that Ukraine is prepared to do difficult things, like the Russians are going to have to do difficult things to end this conflict, or at least pause it in some way, shape, or form, he told reporters, according to the New York Times.
So this came from the New York Times, and supposedly Rubio told reporters that that Ukraine should give up the idea of returning to pre-2014 borders and getting Crimea back, getting the Donbas region back, Kherson region back, Zaporozhye, all that is gone, is what New York Times was reporting that Rubio said after the meeting in Saudi Arabia. But Ukraine, after that, they came out and they challenged those reports from the New York Times and other papers and saying, no, Rubio didn't say that. We didn't even talk about pre-2014 borders. Kyiv challenges reports that U.S. dismisses pre-war border discussion. Senior U.S. officials have stated that they do not want to hear, this was the claim that that New York Times and others were making. Senior U.S. officials have stated they do not want to hear, and this is in quotes. If this is not true, why is this in quotes? That they do not want to hear any requests from Ukraine regarding the restoration of the country's borders to their 2022 status. The Center for Countering Disinformation denied these claims. So they talked to Kiev and the representatives from Ukraine, and they said, no, that's not true. Rubio never said that. The discussion never came up. And this is a big point. This is why the Kursk region was so important, is because this was the bargaining chip. This was the bargaining chip to get some of this land back. This is going to be the big point of contention when these two groups finally come to a table and they negotiate a long-lasting peace deal. It's all about getting this land back. And then Zelenskyy gave a speech this week. This is March 12th. Zelenskyy, Ukraine will never recognize occupied territories as Russia. Never, is what he says. We will never occupy those regions. These are the regions that we're talking about here. Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Crimea. These 5 provinces are the provinces that Russia has seized since 2014. Now, in 2014, they had only seized and annexed Crimea. They don't annex these regions until 2022. Now, I've asked this question, and you need to think about this because the Donbas region, Luhansk and Donetsk, they did a referendum in 2014 to declare their independence, just like Crimea. And after they declared their independence, they sent representatives to Moscow to request annexation. They wanted to be annexed, just like Crimea. And Putin said no. He refused to annex them. He doesn't annex them for another 8 years. Why doesn't Putin, if Putin is so hungry to take Ukrainian land and he wants to gobble up Ukraine, why didn't he immediately annex these regions like he did Crimea back in 2014? Because he was trying to negotiate peace. He was trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement. But when he annexed these regions back in 2014, he said that these regions will always be Russia. I have a clip of when Putin annexed these regions back in 2022.
Tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin proclaiming victory will be ours while hosting a celebratory concert in Moscow's Red Square after formally announcing the illegal annexation of 15% of Ukraine, joining hands with the leaders of 4 Russian-occupied regions, chanting Russia, signaling a new escalation of this war.
So this is in September of 2022. He finally annexes these regions after 8 years of trying to negotiate peace. And that's what I'm telling you. Because of Ukraine's behavior, that's why they lose more land. They would have only lost Crimea at that point if they would have been able to negotiate peace before the war started. But they didn't want to negotiate peace. They wanted to keep the war going. So Putin says, I'm taking these 4 regions. And these are the 4 regions where Zelenskyy is saying that we will never recognize these territories. So this is why Putin is he wants a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, where he's going to block off certain territory here to separate. This is all part of the negotiations that Putin wants. But these are the regions that Putin has occupied. And the funny thing about these regions, I want you to look at this map. This is the map of the election that Viktor Yanukovych, the democratically elected president that was overthrown in a coup d'etat by the United States and Ukrainian Nazis, he wins this election against Yulia Tymoshenko. And this is in 2010 is when this election happens. And you can look here, the areas that are in dark blue, Donbas, Zaporozhye, Kherson, even Crimea, all of these regions voted for the president that the United States staged a coup d'etat against. They all voted for him, and look at large numbers in the Donbas region. So these people are Russian speaking. They identify more with Russia. They want to be with Russia. That's why they're all happy here when Putin finally annexes them, because they requested to be annexed back in 2014, and Putin said no. And then in 2022, he finally annexes them, and that's why they're all happy here. These are the leaders of those 4 provinces. They're all happy because Putin has finally agreed to annex them. And this is the map of the election in 2010. These people identify more with Russia. So remember Elon Musk, he put out this peace proposal just as an idea of a peace proposal. I think this was back in 2022 or 2023. And he says redo elections in annexed regions under UN supervision. I don't know about UN, if we can trust them, but we'll have election monitors come in. Redo elections in the annexed regions under UN supervision. If Russia leaves, if that is what the people, if that is the will of the people. Crimea, formerly part of Russia, has always been. The water supply to Crimea is assured. Why is that? Because after the 2014 annexation of Crimea, Ukraine cut off the only fresh water supply to Crimea. So that was very important. And then Ukraine remains neutral. Just these 4 bullet points is what Elon Musk put out. And they all jumped down his throat. No, we're never going to agree to that. I can't believe Elon Musk is even putting that out. Look how many votes there are. Over 1.5 million votes. No, people say no. That's not, we don't want this peace agreement. I mean, why if Zelensky's saying we'll never recognize these regions, why don't you let these people vote and see if they want to be part of Russia, if they want to be part of Ukraine? This is why they won't let them vote. It's about democracy. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back on Monday. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.